If I don't get my protein, I get dizzy, really. I really do. I know it sounds crazy, but I can hardly stand up.
When I don't get enough protein, I get really, really tired.
I get constipated if I don't get enough protein.
I can't have an orgasm without having my protein.
Oh God, I feel so sleepy unless, I get my protein.
I toss and turn, I don't go to bed with the fullness in my stomach.
I worry about protein. I worry about it all the time. And when I eat it, it's all I can think about.
I get circles under my eyes, but the next day, if I eat any kind of protein, the next night I am sleeping like a baby.
Have you ever heard of anyone ever having a protein deficiency?
I think so.
You think so?
I think so.
Protein deficiency. They were deficient in protein.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Isn't that like anemia?
Anemia.
You get low blood from that. No, that's iron. Protein. Well, yeah.
Well, what happens if you get protein deficiency?
Protein.
Well, you've heard of it.
But I get constipated if I don't get enough protein.
I never heard of anyone suffering of protein deficiency.
Oh, no, I hear a bunch of people that always have low energy, not enough protein in their diet.
So protein gives you energy?
Yes.
It does?
Yes.
How do you know that?
Because it's through a chain of bodily functions.
Do you even know what protein is?
Yeah, I know what protein is. Do you?
How much protein should you be getting?
How much do you want?
Have you ever heard of a protein deficiency?
I'm concerned about protein because, hey, it's how I make my living. I don't know why you're concerned about it. It ain't your business.
If you had a choice of eating any food on a regular basis, what instinctively would you choose?
Broccoli.
Broccoli?
Tri-tip. Mostly chicken. I don't eat much beef because I get the gout.
I always choose something with protein. Something meaty. Something
meaty?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't know. It's like whenever I go get food, I always the first thing I grab is something with something that's meat. I always grab something that's warm, something that's from an animal.
From an animal?
Yeah.
Right, because that has more protein.
Yes.
What? Has everyone gone nuts? Protein this, protein that? It's all I hear about these days. People are so crazy about this stuff, you could sell anything if you put a protein label on it. Not getting enough protein won't make you dizzy or constipated. You can still have orgasms. It won't make you sleepy or keep you awake. And protein is the poorest source of energy on the planet. Everyone is so worried about not getting enough protein, you'd think it's really hard to find. But you know, it's all around us. In fact, I'm standing on protein right now. You may not recognize it, but a cow would. Now, I'm going to let you in on a dirty little secret. Ready? All protein comes from plant foods. Yes, plants. The interaction of sunlight on plants produces protein. Think of it this way. The P in plants stands for protein. Okay, another little secret. All natural foods have protein. Let me repeat that. All foods found in nature have protein.
I don't believe that.
I don't believe that.
No, I don't think every food has protein.
All food does not have protein. Some foods are carbs.
All foods maybe have sugar. I mean, I've heard of that.
I actually have heard that all foods have proteins.
Does bread have protein?
I don't think bread has any protein.
15%?
Bread has protein?
15% protein.
5%?
I'd say around 15.
25%.
15%.
10%.
5.
I didn't think there was any. Are you sure?
Whole wheat bread is 21% protein.
Celery, 2.
15% protein as well.
25%.
0.00001%?
About 5% I give celery.
No protein in celery.
0.
Believe it or not, celery is 17% protein.
About 20% protein.
2.
12.
1%?
0.
75%.
30%?
No, there's no protein in tomato.
A tomato is 20%.
50%.
2%?
25%.
3%?
No, that's in the vegetable category.
Ballpark, maybe 17.
Cauliflower, 32%.
75%.
25% protein.
45%.
Asparagus, same. Vegetable category. No protein.
Asparagus, 44%.
Spinach has about 30% protein.
98%.
20?
Same thing. Vegetable, vegetable, vegetable. No protein. It's green.
60%.
Popeye ate it, so I'll say 65%.
2 to 3.
Okay, so cauliflower, asparagus, spinach,
I'm gonna go with 0.
all 0.
Yes.
And spinach is 50% protein. In fact, calorie for calorie, spinach has more protein than top sirloin beef.
Really? I don't believe that. Really?
I wouldn't believe you. I'd want to see some data.
Popeye was right.
You're full of it.
I'm always amazed when I hear people worry about not getting enough protein. Sure, there have been rare cases of protein deficiency, but the cause is always severe, and I mean severe, malnutrition, something you'll simply never experience. Because all foods have protein, if you're getting enough calories, you'll be getting enough protein. Unless, of course, you're on some crazy diet or whiskey is your main meal. It's so strange. Protein is our biggest nutritional worry, yet you'd have to be almost dead before you'd be short on the stuff. Do you worry about getting enough fat in your diet? Well, it's as easy to get enough protein in your diet as it is to get enough fat. So why is it we're so worried about this one nutrient? In a word, brainwashing, by the same folks who bring you meat, poultry, egg, and dairy products. Really, I mean, be honest, how many of you knew that all foods have protein? Guess what? You've been conned, hoodwinked, had. Your brain has been washed since childhood by those food pyramids provided free to your school courtesy of, big surprise, the meat and dairy industries. Advertising disguised as education. Hey, you were duped. Your school was in on it, your teacher was in on it, and yes, your parents, siblings, and peer groups were all in on this conspiracy designed to convince you only animal foods possess this so-called miraculous substance. This all started back in 1838 when a molecule was discovered which researchers mistakenly thought was more important than it actually is. As a result, they named it protein, which means of prime importance. Today, we know that protein is no more important than any other nutrient, but the name remained, and we still mistakenly think protein is the most important nutrient of them all.
I do feel that protein is the most important nutrient of all of them.
Why
Yes,
is
I
that?
do.
Why is that?
Because that's what I was taught in school.
Oh, Okay, so that must be right if you were taught in school.
Yeah, because they never would lie to us in school.
Okay.
They would always tell us the truth.
Because it gives you something for your blood, red count blood cells. It does something for the blood.
The blood.
I've heard that it's supposed to strengthen your bones. So I think so. Protein's got to be really, really important. Yeah.
After the discovery of protein, scientists kept churning out misinformation about the stuff. In the mid-1800s, one scientist made the casual observation that people who had a choice of eating any food would instinctively choose foods with a high protein content. Translated, they would instinctively choose meat over other foods. And without any scientific data to support this, other so-called scientists came to the same conclusion. And then, in 1914, scientists discovered that rats on single-food diets grew better on animal sources of protein than they did on plant sources. The result? Animal foods were officially classified as superior, or Class A, sources of protein, while plant proteins were relegated to inferior Class B proteins. These experiments gave irrefutable scientific proof of a human instinct for meat, of a human instinct for animal foods. Everyone was happy. The road to good health was suddenly paved with animal protein. There's something these scientists failed to notice. Can you guess what it was?
Rats are not human.
That's right. Rats, however cute and cuddly, are simply not human. And humans are not rats. Well, most of them. And the protein requirements of rats are not at all like human requirements. It takes 6 months for a human infant to double in size. 6 months. Baby rats do this in just 4.5 days. They grow 40 times faster than humans. This is why the mother's milk of a rat is almost half protein. It has to be to support such rapid growth. Guess how much protein human mother's milk has? Just 5 to 6% of total calories. The amount of protein you need, in other words, is directly tied to how fast you are growing. And this is true of all mammals. There are some other big differences between humans and rats that have to do with amino acids, the building blocks of protein. A protein is a chain of amino acids. These acids can be linked together in different ways to form different types of proteins. Some amino acids can be made by the body and some have to be acquired from food. Human adults need 8 amino acids from food. Some studies have indicated we may require 9 amino acids, but that's still unsettled, so we'll stick to 8 for our purposes. Like any other nutrient, protein does different things, but one of its major functions is to provide the building materials for our cells. When you were first born, you needed a lot of protein because you were growing faster than you ever would in your entire life. But once you stopped growing, you no longer needed as much protein. You just needed the stuff to repair and maintain your cells. Now, back to the rat story. The reason rats did so well on animal foods is that rats require 10 amino acids from food, whereas human adults only require 8. And any single animal food, such as meat or eggs, has the 10 amino acids rats need, whereas no single plant food contains all 10. This is why rats did better on animal foods. They were only being fed a single plant food at a time. And believe it or not, this is the reason animal foods were declared superior to plant foods. Animal food made great rat chow. So based on the nutritional requirements of rats, animal protein was declared the gold standard for humans. It wasn't until the 1940s that scientists finally discovered that human adults don't need to get 10 amino acids from food, but only 8. But scientists came up with something equally as silly, and it still dominates discussions about protein to this day. Instead of superior and inferior, the wording changed to complete and incomplete protein sources. Translated, that still means animal and plant sources of protein, and still means superior and inferior. So what's going on? We human adults need to get 8 amino acids from food. Any single animal food has all 8 amino acids. Thus, they have complete proteins. But only a few single plant foods have all 8 amino acids. So protein from most plant foods is considered to be incomplete. So if you eat a single plant food, it might be deficient in some amino acid. That is, deficient in, yes, protein. But wait, how many of you out there eat just a single plant food, like a banana, as your only food source for days or weeks on end? No one eats like that unless you're a complete idiot.
I wouldn't be able to get all the proper nutrients if I only ate one food. That would be crazy. I'd just go nuts.
I can imagine that. That's like cavemanish.
This is the problem with the idea of complete and incomplete proteins. You see, plant foods have all 8 amino acids. It's just that only a few individual plant foods have all 8. But if you eat more than one type of plant food, you'll easily get all the essential amino acids. In fact, it's impossible to design a diet based on whole plant foods that would fail to provide all 8 of the essential amino acids. Modern scientists are making the same mistake as the old-fashioned scientists did with rats. They're assuming we eat only a single food, like we're in some kind of rat experiment. It apparently never occurred to them that outside a laboratory setting, people eat, well, like people. The next question is, how much protein do we really need? Estimates have ranged from 2.5% of total calories for adults to 10% to cover everyone's needs. The World Health Organization has recommended 5% for decades, but has recently raised this to 10%, like the US government. And this has a large safety margin padded into it to account for special needs. To realize how big a safety factor goes into this, remember that mother's milk is only 5 to 6%, and mother's milk itself has a large built-in safety factor. To be on the safe side, let's say 5 to 10% of total calories should come from protein. Now, let's look at some protein averages for various categories of plant foods. Whether you think our needs are closer to 2.5% or 10%, every single whole plant food category has more than 10%, except fruit, and that still has more than mother's milk. Getting enough protein from plant foods, in other words, is a snap. Human protein needs are greatest during our first 2 years of existence, when we grow faster than we will ever grow in our lives. At no other time will we need a greater amount of protein, ever. Have you ever seen any bodybuilder actually double in size in just 6 months, like a baby does? Of course not. But even if he could, he would still only need 5 to 6% of his total calories from protein to sustain that growth, just like a baby. Whether you burn 2,000 calories a day or 8,000, whether you're a bodybuilder, marathon runner, or couch potato, you will never need more protein than 6% of total calories. One reason protein needs have become so confused is that traditionally, most people used weight to compare the nutrient value of different foods, and they should have been using calories. For example, whole milk is advertised as only 3.5% fat. Problem is, that's by weight, and 87% of that weight is water, which has no calories. If we calculate the percentage of fat by total calories, instead of 3.5% fat, whole milk is almost half fat. 2% milk? Again, that's measuring fat by weight. By calories, 2% milk is over 30% fat. Hot dogs are advertised as only 30% fat, but that's by weight. By calories, the fat content is over 80%. Looking at food values by weight is a major part of deceptive advertising by food manufacturers. Weight is fine in some comparisons, but how much a food weighs is meaningless when trying to measure the impact nutrients will have on your body. Have you ever heard of a 5-pound-a-day diet? 10 pounds per day?
I've heard of 5 or 10 pound eating contests, but I've never heard of a 5-pound daily diet.
but you have heard of a 2,000 calorie a day diet. Comparing foods by calorie is the most accurate way of measuring the nutrient impact of different foods. Take beef and spinach. If we compare them by weight, say 100 grams of each food, here is how they stack up. According to weight, beef has over 9 times as much protein. But hold on, if we compare them by calorie, the picture changes dramatically. In fact, calorie for calorie, spinach has more protein than top sirloin beef, and 3 times less fat. In other words, Popeye was right all these years. So what about those so-called high-protein foods? Here's a list of common animal foods showing the percentage of fat and protein per calorie. Traditionally, beef has always been the champion of protein. You want protein, you eat beef. You want to be manly, you eat beef. But do you notice anything strange about beef, the king of protein? Calorie for calorie, most of the beef we eat provides far more fat than it does protein. In fact, ocean perch has more protein than any cut of beef. But have you ever heard anyone say, real men eat perch, or he has a really perchy physique? Now take a look at how plant foods stack up as lean sources of protein. All these foods, with the exception of the banana, have more protein than mother's milk. In fact, there are only a few plant foods that have less protein than mother's milk. On average, all the foods listed here have 21% of their calories from protein, more than 3 times that of mother's milk. The average for common cuts of beef, 26%. What about that super high protein from eggs? Only 27% protein. Now what about that lowly garden salad? 30% protein. Which means plant foods can easily meet the heavily padded RDA protein level of 10%. Of course, some people will say they could never eat enough calories to get enough protein. Guess what? The Tarahumara Indians of Mexico, who run over 100 miles nonstop for a period of 2 days, get their calories from a diet of corn, beans, and other plant foods. Despite these facts, the protein propaganda machine still churns out misinformation to this day. The latest piece came in the year 2011 when the USDA unveiled a new food pyramid disguised as a plate with a completely separate label called protein. The image on the plate gives the impression that vegetables, fruits, and grains have no protein. Incredibly, protein has its own portion, as if it were a food. Protein's not a food, it's a nutrient that's in all foods.
It doesn't look like the other food has protein, like protein is its own separate section.
According to this, the other food groups don't have protein.
Totally tells a kid who's just looking at this that there's no vegetables that, you know, that I'm going to eat that's going to give me protein. I don't see that working at all.
I feel this is a conspiracy to confuse and manipulate people into thinking that protein is more important than it really is.
Another deception comes right from your doctor's office in the form of a simple blood test. Because now, believe it or not, they're actually testing for protein. A few of my acquaintances recently had their checkups, and guess what? Their total protein score was low. So what did the good doctors tell them? You must eat more chicken and fish. And that's exactly what they did. The first thing you have to do is ask, their scores were low compared to what? And secondly, what does low mean? For total protein, normal is based on the national average for protein consumption. Do you see anything wrong with that? The national average is way too high because Americans are eating abnormally high levels of the stuff. Let's look at different levels of protein. We have mother's milk, which is 5 to 6% protein and should be the standard. Then we have the government recommended 10% protein, which has a large safety factor padded into it. But our national average is around 16% protein, 3 times higher than mother's milk, which means a baby feeding on mother's milk would score extremely low on this test. So low the doctor would have to advise the mother to stop breastfeeding and start feeding her baby chicken and fish. Otherwise, the baby might be, yes, protein deficient. Do you see anything wrong with this picture? A 5 to 6% protein diet is normal for a baby growing faster than any adult ever will grow. And yet the same figure would be deemed insufficient for an adult who has stopped growing. In fact, what these tests define as normal is extremely abnormal. In fact, it's bizarre. Because our protein standards are so out of whack, a normal protein diet is now called a low protein diet. Which gets us into the second question. What does low actually mean? It simply means you are consuming less than the national average, and that is a good thing. So when the doctor says you must eat more chicken and fish to raise your protein score, he's also telling you to increase your consumption of cholesterol and saturated fat, which will raise your cholesterol score. Following your doctor's advice, you start eating chicken, fish, and other so-called lean meats. But at the next checkup, the doctor says your protein level is now good. You're back up to the national average, but your total cholesterol level is too high. No worries, the good doctor has a solution: Lipitor. In other words, Lipitor is one side effect of getting a good protein score. To solve a high cholesterol score, the doctor puts you on a drug you will have to take the rest of your life if you want a good protein score. Because of our mindless pursuit of protein, Americans have made Lipitor the biggest selling drug in history, and bypass surgery, stents, and angioplasties the most popular and profitable procedures in medicine. In one study, which followed over 22,000 healthy adults over 2 decades, it was found that high-protein diets shorten lives by 22%. Yes, too much of a good thing can be bad. The body needs a little protein, but not too much. In fact, eating too much protein has absolutely no benefits. Zero, nil, nada. It will not result in bigger muscles, stronger bones, or increased immunity. In legitimate studies, absolutely no advantage has been found in eating excess protein. Of course, athletes do need more protein, but they also need more calories, and they'll get more protein naturally in the right proportion as they consume more calories. Of course, a common psychological side effect of all this protein advertising is that people say it gives them more energy.
That always have low energy, not enough protein in their diet.
But in fact, protein is a poor source for energy because it takes far more energy to digest it and neutralize the excess acid than the energy required to digest fats or carbohydrates. And since meat is made up of only protein and fat, it turns out the best energy source in meat is in fact the fat. So if you want more energy, you might as well get a tub of lard and eat that. Take a tip from Carl Lewis and many other athletes who get their protein from plant foods. Carl had the best year of his career when he switched to a 100% plant-based diet. The story of protein began when scientists observed that humans would instinctively choose high-protein foods over other foods, and this would result in the best diet possible. So what about this instinct today? With more food choices than in any time in history, the general public instinctively chooses the poorest food choices on the planet. It isn't instinct that is driving us to these places, it's advertising. The key is to get a healthy amount of protein, and the best lean sources of protein come from plant foods. And the next time someone asks you, where do you get your protein? Say you get it from food, all foods, but primarily plant foods. The same place the strongest animals on the planet get their protein. Thank you for joining me today.